So way back in March of 2022, I was asked by my aunt about the possibility of creating a music visualizer. There was a live show coming up in July, and they were going to be performing on stage for an event called Robot Apocalypse on July 9th in Flagstaff, Arizona. It goes without saying, but I was in. Obviously. Now, this was just a heads up, and it wouldn't be until later that we actually discussed the specifics of the video. Because of the theming of the event, the group decided on a cyborg Alice in Wonderland piece, set to the tune of White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane. And by the time that was decided, I had a lot less time to work on it. Like, a lot less time. About 10 days to be exact. We've all been there. We've all had deadlines which seem impossible with not enough time or maybe not enough resources, and to be frank, they aren't easy. So what I want to do here today is make a tutorial and walkthrough for people who have those small deadlines for large projects. Because trust me, they can be a lot to deal with. No offense to my aunt, but they don't have to be. And here's why. The first step was, of course,
I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye, I'm late.
So far, all of the creating had been pre-production, which is something that is vital, if not the most important, part of the project. I feel it's important to note that, in this instance, I had a lot of warning before I began. For some projects though, whether it be a commission, part of a job, or even a personal goal, you will not always have that time. And for those who need that warning, I think it's important to tell you that you will not always have time to mentally prepare, like I did here. So prepare for that. So once we had the song picked out, we had a phone call where I sketched out ideas and we discussed the overall tone for the piece. I was on vacation when she called, and I went back home the next day, so since I was going to be drawing on my vacation anyways, I took my free time to draw out the concepts. Anyways, here were the key things needed for the music video. Alice, the Red Queen, the Mad Hatter, the Caterpillar, and that's it. Oh, also, they needed to be robotic in some way, hence the name of the show.
It's the name of the movie.
And that left me with these. I sent these over, she loved them, and with some minor changes, we moved along to
I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye.
Actually, first I wrote out a script, but whatever. Together, the script and storyboarding took just one day. Less if you include things like showering, eating, resting, napping, sleeping, relaxing, and doing nothing. For most people, this step is necessary to show your collaborator, just so that they can see how it's supposed to look and changes can be made. In general, the earlier into a project you can change something, the better. There'll be more on this later. At this point, an animatic was created, and with some minor tweaks we were able to move along to the next step. Now, it was time for
I'm late for a very important date.
Now comes the hardest part of having all your work planned out. Actually working on it. For this, I used Strathmore 110-pound cardstock paper with a 4x3 aspect ratio guide to mark where my sketch's borders were. The video's aspect ratio was chosen as this because it would later be made to resemble 35mm film, which is my biggest gripe about the video as a whole, but we'll get back to that later. These were sketched in pencil and inked with a basic ballpoint big pen. I could have used India ink or something, but I was too afraid to mess them up. I still messed up a few of them anyways though. With them inked and the penciling erased to some degree, I had them scanned at 600 dpi. My philosophy with scanning is to do it once when possible. The resolution of these scans means I could upscale them to poster size and they would still look crisp. Which reminds me, you should check out my Redbubble. Look, I got prints. So that's cool. With all that said and done, it was time for
I'm late for a very important date.
I debated for the whole of the inking process whether or not to color these traditionally. I had imagined a watercolor style or something like that, but the thought alone of having to redo them if I messed up was enough to convince me to use digital. Plus, I'm pretty positive these pens are water soluble, which is something I didn't even consider until now. Wow. Yeah, that would have been bad. In Photoshop, the levels were adjusted to create contrast and get rid of imperfections, and some alterations were made to clean them up. Primarily, Alice's face, which was seriously f***ed up. Using the channels layers down near the regular layers, I separated the blue from the others, selected it using Ctrl plus left click on the image icon, turned the other channels back on, then added a new layer where I could fill it in with black. Just a heads up. Sometimes you may have to select the inverse, Ctrl Shift I. Using the lasso tool, I selected certain areas and filled them using solid colors on new layers. Because I had already hatched the illustrations, I didn't worry too much about shading, and this meant I could just fill away without much thought. Now, this is the part where I recommend something to listen to while you work. Personally, if I try to listen to anything with talking in it, I slow down majorly, sometimes taking twice as long to do a project. Instead, I just listen to music. But if you all enjoy things to listen to, and you don't mind talking, then perhaps check out Clocked Out Creatures, the only podcast whose acronym is COCK. It was our podcast from Dankrite, which we used to do, and so far we have 3 episodes out. Anyways, I'm not here to plug content. Wait, I wrote this script. But also, The Chat, my personal podcast, is being rebooted, and we'll have new episodes starting next week, where we just shoot the shit and mostly gravitate towards talking about conspiracy theories and hypotheticals for no real reason. Unfortunately though, the chat's acronym is not COCK, and now I'm realizing the deadline for that is coming up soon. Speaking of deadlines, the coloring was just about done, with the exception of the opening shot, which had to be saved as a PSB file, which is just a massive Photoshop file, which now takes up about 3 gigabytes on my hard drive. But finally, the coloring was done, and after saving these as PNGs, I could move on to The industry standard for animation ranges from Adobe Animate to Toon Boom Studios to Maya, and so on, but today we're animating in Sony Vegas Pro. Most of the assets for this project were stationary, with only minor sliding or zooming, but occasionally there would be something like arms that needed to move. The most noticeable are the titular rabbit's eye opening and the giant knight pointing. For these I used a light board and clips to make sure the pieces would line up with each other after scanning. Then I double-checked in Photoshop that they overlapped properly before saving them as PNGs. That way, when I animated keyframes on one layer in Sony Vegas, I could just copy and paste them instead of trying to reanimate each individual piece. Fun fact, this is the part of the work where your computer hates you the most. But with enough time and perseverance, eventually, something will turn out like you planned. The animation, however, was still not done without the rest of the pieces to go around it. And with only 3 days left to go, I moved on to the The internet is your weird best friend in these instances. The Internet Archive is a place home to many strange, random, and downright obscure things, most of which are royalty-free or aren't going to get you sued because the owners forgot about them. And I guess that makes it okay to sample to some minor degree. If Daft Punk could do it, then so can I. Like I mentioned before, I was going for a 35mm film aesthetic and was able to find plenty of stock footage and films from the era of the 1970s to 1980s that matched that aesthetic. So in order to fill in the animation, I patched some of these in, added some chroma keyer effects, and called it good. But then, I f***ed it all up. Take it from me, it's not enough to just throw a green screen layer over some footage and call it a day. If you want a film or VHS filter that looks good, you're gonna have to do things like color correction, blurs, noise filters, grain, imperfections, light leaks, etc. And I did not really know this at the time. So it's just a digital video with film grain over top of it. Sorry. With all this work done though, the only thing left to do was to render it. What?
No time to say hello, goodbye,
I rendered it in 2K using the Magic's AVC/AAC MP4 format with the NVIDIA NVENC encoder. And with that, my work was done. The video was uploaded and sent on its merry way with only 1 day left to spare. They played it on stage, and absolutely everything went perfectly. Just kidding. Actually, I needed to add the Cheshire Cat, so I went back and drew him, scanned him, colored him, animated him, and re-rendered the project. But then, I realized I forgot to color a part of the background in this shot, so I had to color that, re-render again, then it was good. Except it messed up slightly, and I had to re-render at a slower setting to get better quality. Now, it was good. Except I needed to add a second film cue so that the band knew when to wind down for the start of the real song. Then, it was done. Except that there was a frame of the Queen flipping upside down, and if I didn't fix it now, then I'd look like a complete idiot when it went up on that stage. By that point, there were no days left without my personal schedule. I had time to relax and do something I wanted to do instead, like make more videos. Alright folks, I have a confession to make. When I told you all I only had 10 days to create the music video, I lied. I actually had 20. But, and this is an important lesson, when making something for someone, you should have it done before the deadline. Of course, there will be times when the deadline is just not possible, but I would argue that in those instances, you shouldn't even agree to do the job in the first place. For me, if I have a project to do in X amount of days, I set myself a minimum deadline of 2/3 of that date. Then, if it goes over, and it will, it's not the end of the world. But what's really important is being in the mentality of having less time than you do. And if you follow these steps, you'll be able to finish a project with time to spare, no matter the size. But don't do that. I'm a workaholic, and my anxiety prevents me from resting. I'm tired and worn and stupid to some degree, and I don't know how to compliment myself, and my teeth are yellow, and my feet are rotten, and my eyes are milky, and I have a gimpy leg and long arms, and my nose is too big. And always remember, if you set your hopes high and your workload higher, you'll never fall behind, or be disappointed. Whatever. Alternatively, work hard, play hard.